weird part wasn't that the pickup kept circling. Out on a highway station in the middle of nowhere, people miss the turn all the time, or they drive past once to see if the place is even open. It was late. Half the lights on the building were dead, and the sign out by the road only had about half the letters working. So the first time that truck rolled by slow enough that I could hear the tires crunch over the gravel near the pumps, I barely looked up. The second time, I did. I was standing there with the nozzle in my tank, one hand in my jacket pocket, because the wind had that dry, cold bite to it, and I watched the same dark pickup go past me again without stopping. Not fast, not like somebody was lost and annoyed, slow, like the driver was looking. I remember thinking I should just get back on the road and not overthink it. Then the truck disappeared into the dark past the edge of the building, and the old country song playing from the speaker above the door cut out in the middle of a line. That was the first moment I had the feeling that I was already a little too far from help. I was on my way up through southern Wyoming for my older brother's wedding rehearsal. He lives up near Jackson now, and I was coming in from Colorado because I had a final that week and couldn't leave earlier. So I got this genius idea that I'd just drive overnight, save money on a hotel, make it there by late morning, and maybe sleep for an hour in the car before I had to put on a button-up shirt and pretend I wasn't running on gas station coffee and trail mix. I was 22 at the time, and I hate driving alone at night. I've always hated it. I'm not one of those people who acts all rugged about long drives. If I'm by myself too long, every sound the car makes starts sounding expensive, and every pair of headlights behind me starts feeling personal. My mom still makes fun of me because I used to call her from parking lots when I got home from high school late and didn't want to walk from the car to the front door in the dark. Not even because anything had happened. I just never liked that feeling of being by myself somewhere quiet. By the time I hit that stretch of Highway 191, I'd already been on the road almost 7 hours. My shoulders were tight from driving, my eyes felt sandy, and the fuel gauge had dropped below a quarter tank. I kept doing that stupid thing where you calculate how much farther you can probably make it, then immediately stop trusting your own math because you're tired. There wasn't much out there. Just long black road, low scrub, fence lines that only showed up when the headlights hit them right, and open prairie that made the sky feel too big. I finally saw the station sign ahead and actually said, out loud, thank God. It was a single pump place, the kind of station that looks like it got copied and pasted out of another decade and then left alone. One building, one set of pumps under a little canopy, a row of old ice chests by the wall, and a few yellowed windows with bug screens that didn't sit quite straight. There was one other car there when I pulled in, a dusty sedan parked near the side of the building, but I didn't see anyone around it. Inside, everything seemed normal. Warm, a little stale, smelled like burnt coffee, floor cleaner, and that hot motor smell that comes in every time somebody opens the door after a long drive. There was a clerk behind the counter, maybe in his 50s, just sitting on a stool with a little television propped up beside the register. He had the bored look of somebody awake too long. There was a guy by the cooler in a ball cap, and another man near the coffee station stirring something in a paper cup. Nothing about it should have stood out. I grabbed coffee because I knew if I sat back down in the car without it, I was going to start blinking too long. I remember the cup was one of those thin white ones where the lid never feels all the way on. I also grabbed one of those plastic-wrapped cinnamon rolls that always look better when you're tired than they actually taste. The man by the coffee station kind of smiled at me and said, "Long night?" He wasn't scary looking. That's the thing. If he had looked obviously dangerous, I would have had a reason to react sooner. He just looked like a regular guy trying too hard to be friendly. Late 30s maybe, heavy jacket, short beard, face a little red like he'd been out in the cold. I said yeah, heading to my brother's wedding. Didn't mean to say that much. It just came out because I was tired, and because when somebody talks to you in a tiny place at night, sometimes you answer just to seem normal. He laughed and said, "Man, that's one hell of a drive for family." I remember smiling at that because it was true. While he talked, the other guy, the one in the ball cap, came past us without buying anything, and walked back outside. I noticed him mostly because he didn't look at the counter or the coolers or any of the shelves. He just kind of drifted through the store like he was checking something. I paid for my coffee and the cinnamon roll, and the clerk barely looked at me. He rang it up, handed me my change, and turned back toward the little television. Country music had come back on overhead by then, low and scratchy. It should have felt ordinary again. But when I went outside, the guy in the ball cap was standing on the far side of my car, not doing anything obvious. Just standing there with his hands in his hoodie pocket, looking off toward the road, like he was waiting for someone. My car was this old silver Corolla with a dent above the back wheel and a bad passenger side speaker that rattled any time the bass got too high. There was no reason for him to be that close to it, but there also wasn't a clean reason to say anything. He was just near it. So I did what a lot of people do when they don't want to look nervous. I pretended not to notice. I took my coffee over to the hood, set it down carefully, and pulled out my phone like I was checking directions. No signal. Not even that weak one-bar lie your phone sometimes gives you. Just nothing. I told myself that was fine. Of course, there was no signal. I was in the middle of nowhere. Fill up, get back in the car, keep moving. Then the friendly guy came out of the store too. He stopped on the driver's side of my car, a little behind the door, and kept talking like we were in the middle of a conversation. Asked where the wedding was, asked if I was in college, asked if I was the best man. Harmless questions, all of them. Normal enough that brushing him off would have felt rude. But every time I shifted to move toward my door, he shifted too, without seeming like he was doing it. I told myself I was being dramatic. People stand in awkward places all the time. Then, I tried it on purpose. I took my coffee off the hood and walked around the front of the car like I was just stretching my legs. The guy in the ball cap drifted with me. Not directly. He just ended up, again, near the driver's door. Then the friendly guy came around the back of the car, still talking. That was when something cold settled in my stomach. Not panic yet. More like the moment your body notices a pattern, before your brain wants to say it out loud. I laughed a little and said, I should get moving. The friendly guy nodded, but didn't move. He looked past me toward the highway and said, yeah, roads get weird out here late. I remember that exact sentence because there was nothing in it, and somehow it still felt like a sentence with a second meaning. I glanced at the window of the store. The clerk was visible behind the counter. He was looking out. The man in the ball cap had wandered close enough to my rear door now that if I unlocked the car from where I stood, he'd hear it. I don't even know why I thought that, but I did. The wind was scraping dust along the concrete, and I could hear the little metal flap on a trash can snapping over and over. I moved again, this time quickly, as I had just remembered something in the back seat. The ball cap guy stepped right beside the driver's door. Not accidentally. Not maybe. Right there. I stopped. The friendly guy said, "You all right?" And I did this stupid thing, where I smiled. Because once you're in a social situation that's clearly wrong, part of your brain still wants to keep it from turning embarrassing. Like, if you can just stay polite enough, maybe you'll get to leave without admitting that you know what's happening. I said, "Yeah, just tired." He nodded like we were friends. Like he understood me. I looked back toward the store again, and that's when I saw the clerk reach under the counter and lock the front door. I couldn't hear it from where I was, but I saw the movement, saw him turn the deadbolt, and then straighten up without looking at me. He didn't wave, didn't come out, didn't pick up a phone, just locked the door and stepped back. That moment changed everything, because it killed the last normal explanation I had. If he had thought I was overreacting, why lock the door? If he thought those guys were a problem, why not say anything? And if he knew what was about to happen, why was he protecting himself instead of helping me? The friendly guy must have seen something change in my face, because his voice got even calmer after that. Softer, almost. He said, "Hey, actually, can you give me a hand with something real quick? Won't take a second." I said. With what? He pointed toward the pickup, which I now saw was parked off to the dark side of the building, partly out of sight from the road. I hadn't even noticed when it came back. He said, "Just need help lifting something into the bed." My shoulders messed up. The other guy moved before I could answer. He opened my passenger door. Just opened it. Like it was his car, too. I heard the hinges, saw the dome light come on inside my Corolla, saw one of the hoodies I had tossed on the seat slump toward the floor. For a second, my brain actually snagged on that detail, the stupid gray hoodie on the passenger seat, because it was so normal, and it made what was happening feel even more unreal. I snapped, "Hey, what are you doing?" The ball cap guy didn't answer. He leaned in a little, one hand on the top of the door. The friendly guy didn't even look surprised. He just said, "Easy, man, easy," like I was the one making it weird. I looked at the store window one more time. The clerk had turned away, not stepped back in shock, not reached for a phone. He literally turned his shoulders and looked down at the counter, like somebody who doesn't want to witness something he already expected. After that, everything got very fast. My coffee was still in my hand, hot enough that the side of the cup felt soft. I didn't think through it. I just threw it as hard as I could at the open passenger side of the pickup behind them. Not at the men, at the truck. I think some part of me wanted noise. Distraction. Something sudden. The cup burst against the seat and dashboard through the open window. Coffee went everywhere. The friendly guy flinched and half-turned. The ball cap guy jerked back from my door on instinct. And because both of them moved at once, there was finally a gap. I lunged for my driver's door, hit the unlock button with my key fob before I was even there, yanked it open, and dropped into the seat so hard my knee slammed the steering column. My hands didn't work right. I missed the key slot the first time, then remembered the car was already on because I'd left it running while pumping gas. I threw it into drive. The friendly guy shouted something. I never knew what. The ball cap guy grabbed the door frame and missed by maybe an inch. My tires spun on the dirty concrete for half a second, then caught, and I shot out of there with the passenger door on their pickup still hanging open behind me. I didn't even pull around cleanly. I cut too tight, clipped one of those plastic water buckets by the pump, and heard it crack under the bumper. Then I was back on the highway. I kept expecting headlights to come after me. That's what I was waiting for. Some sudden burst of the pickup in my mirror, engine revving. Them deciding they didn't want to let me go after all. But when I looked back, all I saw was the station shrinking behind me. That one weak patch of light in the middle of black nothing. And the two men were just standing there, watching. They didn't run to their truck, didn't wave their arms, didn't chase me. They just stood near the pumps like they had all the time in the world. I drove way too fast for a while, I know that. My whole body felt wrong. My mouth was dry, but I could still smell the coffee on my sleeve where it had splashed me. I kept checking the mirror, then the dark shoulder, then the fuel gauge, then the mirror again. My hands were shaking hard enough that the wheel kept moving a little under them. I tried calling 911 when I got a signal back, maybe 20 minutes later, or maybe longer. I don't know. Time felt slippery. The dispatcher asked for the station name, and I didn't know it. Asked for the mile marker, and I hadn't looked. Asked if anyone had physically attacked me, and I said no, not exactly. And I could hear my own voice sounding young and uncertain, and not useful. I told her two men had boxed me out of my car, and one of them opened my passenger door, and the clerk locked the station door instead of helping. She said she'd note it and notify the local county office. That was basically it. I got to the next town and pulled into a chain gas station right off the main road, where there were bright lights and a couple of people inside, buying cigarettes and windshield fluid, like it was any normal night. I parked under a camera and sat there with the engine running because I didn't trust myself to turn it off yet. I called my brother. The first thing he said was, "Dude, are you crying?" And I got mad because I wasn't. Not really. But my voice had gone thin and shaky in that way where it sounds like you are. I told him what happened. He went from joking to dead serious in about 2 seconds and said, "Stay where you are. Go inside, be around people, send me your location. He wanted me to wait for daylight, but I didn't want to sit still that long. I ended up staying there almost an hour anyway, because every time I thought about getting back on a dark stretch of road, my chest tightened up. The weirdest part is how normal the rest of the drive looked after that. Same highway, same empty land, same occasional truck lights way off in the distance. But once something like that happens, the whole world feels staged. Every car behind you is behind you on purpose. Every place with only one employee feels wrong. Every open lot feels like a trap, because now you know how fast ordinary can stop being ordinary. I made it to the rehearsal late the next morning. My mom kept asking why I looked sick. I told everyone I was just tired, because it was my brother's wedding weekend, and I didn't want to drag that feeling into it. But I barely slept the whole time. I kept replaying tiny parts of it in the wrong order. The open passenger door, the clerk's hand on the lock, the way the friendly guy kept smiling like we were having some harmless roadside conversation. A few days later, when I was back home, I tried to find the station on a map. I spent an embarrassing amount of time zooming in and out on that stretch of highway, trying to figure out which one it had to be. I even called one county office because I wanted to know if anyone had checked on it or if there had been other complaints. The woman I spoke to was polite, but I could tell I wasn't giving her enough to work with. Highway, dark station, 2 guys, bored clerk. That could have been anything, and maybe that's part of why it still bothers me. It was specific enough to feel planned, and vague enough to disappear. I still think about how public it all was. The men never dragged me anywhere, never shouted, never threatened me in words I could repeat later. They just kept using normal behavior to close space around me, until there wasn't going to be anywhere left to stand, except where they wanted, and the clerk. That's the part that never settles. Because if he had been scared too, if he had looked panicked, if he had at least called out something like, "Get in your car," then I could file him away as another person who froze. But he didn't freeze. He locked the door right before it happened, and then he looked away. The next one is from somebody who was used to nights on the road, which makes what happened to him sit a little differently. I've slept in truck stop lots in sleet, dust storms, and one tornado warning that turned into nothing but sideways rain and a lot of bad coffee. So when I say a place felt off, I don't mean I was jumpy. I mean, it got past the filters that usually keep a man doing this job calm. The first thing I noticed was a guy under the fuel canopy, standing in the wash of white light and rain spray, not fueling, not moving much, just watching trucks come and go, like he was waiting for one to matter. At that hour, in weather like that, people don't stand outside unless they have a reason. I was outside Amarillo, parked at one of those huge 24-hour truck stops that tries to be its own little town. Long rows for rigs, bright travel store inside, hot food counter, showers, repair bay, the whole setup. I had been driving nights for about 20 years by then, and I actually preferred stops like that over lonely rest areas. More people, more cameras, more movement. You learn to trust a certain amount of noise. A busy place gives you cover. It means if something goes bad, there are witnesses. Or at least that's what I used to think. I haul refrigerated freight, mostly produce and dairy. And that week I was running a route that had me coming east, with a trailer full of chilled goods, and a delivery window tight enough that I couldn't waste much time. I had already planned my break. Fuel up, grab something hot to eat, do my logbook, sleep about 4 hours, then finish the last leg before dawn. Routine, nothing clever, just work. The storm had built for most of the evening. By the time I rolled into the lot, the rain was hammering so hard on the cab roof, it sounded like a bucket of nails being poured over sheet metal. Every light in the place had a halo around it from the water. The asphalt was shining black, and the wind kept pushing curtains of rain sideways under the canopy. You could smell diesel, wet concrete, and fryer grease every time the main doors opened, and that sharp electric smell storms get when the air feels crowded. I parked at the pump, topped off both tanks, checked the reefer readout, made sure the unit was holding temp where it should, and pulled forward. That's when I first saw him, mid-40s maybe, ball cap pulled low, dark jacket zipped up, no umbrella, no hurry. He was standing near one of the empty islands under the canopy, hands in his pockets, turned just enough that it looked like he might be watching the lot. I figured maybe his ride had gone inside. People get stranded in the weather and wait under the lights. Not weird yet. I went in, got a plastic tray with some eggs I didn't really want, and sausage that had probably been under the heat lamp too long, plus one of those bottled coffees that taste like candy and regret, but does the job. I sat at a corner table by the window and looked over the lot while I ate. My truck was 3 rows out from the entrance by then. The rain had picked up even more. Drivers were coming in and out in bursts, heads down, shoulders hunched, making runs for the doors. The man under the canopy was still there, same spot, more or less. That caught my attention, but not enough to make a story out of it. In this line of work, if you react hard to every little odd detail, you won't make it a month. You notice it, you mark it, you move on. I finished eating, filled my thermos with coffee, and headed back to the truck. Walking across that lot, I had that familiar feeling of being visible in a way you don't love. Wide open space, bright lights overhead, rain bouncing off the ground, trucks humming, people inside their cabs behind glass. Plenty of company, but none of it close enough to matter in the exact second you might need it. I climbed up, locked the doors, and got settled. I always sleep with a system. Shoes where I can get to them, flashlight on the shelf, keys in the same pocket, phone charging beside the bunk, curtains closed, but not all the way, because I like a slim gap where I can check outside without making it obvious I'm checking. That's just habit. 20 years teach you habits. Before I lay down, I looked through that gap. The man was moving between rows, not toward any truck in particular that I could tell. Just there, then not there, then there again under a different light, farther down. I told myself he was walking off a cramp or looking for someone. I closed the curtain. 10 minutes later, I opened it again. He was on my side of the lot now. Still not close enough for me to say he was doing anything, but closer. That was the first turn of it. I started the engine, pulled out, and moved 2 rows over on the excuse that the angle was flatter there, and I preferred not sleeping with the cab leaning slightly, which was true. But mostly, I wanted to test a feeling without admitting to myself that's what I was doing. I parked, set the brake, killed the engine, and waited a minute before checking again. Nothing. I felt a little foolish. That's the problem with a watched feeling. It makes you participate in your own embarrassment. Then maybe 15 minutes later, I looked out and saw him crossing the row ahead of me, hood up now against the rain, head slightly down, moving in no hurry at all. That was enough for me to put my boots back on. I went inside again, carrying my logbook like I had normal business to do. The cashier was a young guy with earbuds in one ear, leaning on the counter near the cigarettes. I said, "Hey, you've got a man outside who's been hanging around the lot for a while. Dark jacket, cap, middle-aged, not driving, not fueling. Might be nothing, but he's making me pay attention." The cashier glanced toward the doors and shrugged, said, "If he's not bothering customers, there isn't much we can do." I said, "He's bothering me." He gave me that service smile people use when they want the conversation over. Said, "Well, if he comes inside and causes trouble, let us know." That irritated me more than it scared me. I've met a lot of workers like that, and most of them aren't bad people. They're just trained to ignore anything that isn't already a fire. Still, I looked over toward a second employee, an older woman stocking lids near the drink station. She had heard enough to know what I was talking about. She didn't join in, didn't ask what truck I was in, just kept stacking. I went to the restroom, washed my hands longer than necessary, and when I came back out, the storm had gotten meaner. The wind was pushing rain all across the lot. Visibility had dropped. The rows of trucks beyond the first few were broken shapes in the water and light. I couldn't see the man. I stood under the awning for a second, letting my eyes adjust, and had this thought that I still remember because it was so plain. If I can't see him, that doesn't mean he's gone. Back in the cab, I called the local non-emergency number. Not because I thought a squad car needed to come flying out for a man standing in the rain, but because I wanted it on record. The woman who answered took the location and then put me on hold. I sat there listening to that soft recorded music while the wipers on somebody's nearby truck squealed back and forth in the storm. While I was on hold, there was a knock on my driver's door. Not loud, just enough to say somebody knew I was inside. I looked out and saw one of the truck stop employees in a yellow rain jacket. A maintenance guy, maybe. I cracked the window an inch. He shouted up, "You all good in there?" I said, "Yeah, why?" He shrugged and said, "Saw your lights on, thought maybe you needed a jump or something." Then he looked past me into the cab in a way I didn't like and added, "Storm's got people acting strange tonight." I said, "Did the cashier send you?" He said, "Nah, just checking." Then he walked off. Maybe that really was all it was. Maybe. But when you've already got the feeling of being tracked, even harmless interactions start taking on edges. I stayed on hold another minute, then another. No answer. Finally, I hung up. Second turn. I moved the truck again. This time farther out toward the back rows, where the pavement wasn't as bright and the parked rigs were spaced wider. I don't usually like sleeping on the edges because you get less foot traffic and fewer eyes, but I wanted to see if distance broke whatever pattern my gut thought it was seeing. My trailer lights reflected red in the standing water as I backed into a slot. I could hear the reefer unit thumping steadily behind me. Familiar sound. A good sound. Mechanical, dependable, honest. I shut down and watched. For a while, nothing. Then a shape moved between trailers 3 rows over. Just a dark figure crossing from one shadow to another. Too far to ID cleanly through the rain, but enough that my shoulders tightened on their own. I leaned forward, trying not to silhouette myself in the cab light. The figure stopped, not moving, just standing in the slice between 2 parked trailers, where it could probably see me if it wanted to. I reached up and killed the little overhead light in the cab. Now I was sitting in dim instrument glow, listening to water drum the roof, and there was this ridiculous thought running through my head that if I stayed very still, I would somehow become less available. Not invisible, just less available. That's what being watched does. It changes the way you move in space, even if nobody ever proves they're watching. The figure eventually moved off. Or maybe I lost it. Hard to say in that weather. I tried the truck stop desk again from inside the store around midnight, this time talking to a different employee, a man with a gray mustache who looked like he'd worked nights for years. I said, "I already mentioned this to your cashier. Someone is wandering the lot, and now I think there may be more than one person involved. Have you had issues with theft out here? Door checks, cargo tampering." He wiped down the counter while I was talking. Didn't stop. Said, "Storms bring in drifters. They poke around, then move on." I said, "That's not an answer." He looked up just long enough to give me one of those slow, patient looks people use when they think experience belongs to them alone. Said, "The best thing is to lock up and get some rest. Probably harmless. Probably harmless." That's the phrase that got repeated all night, like everybody there had decided in advance that nothing counted until blood showed up. I went back out and did not sleep. I lay down, sat back up, checked mirrors, checked the gap in the curtain, checked the locks again, even though I knew they were locked. The storm would ease for maybe 5 minutes, then hammer down harder. Somewhere nearby, an air brake released with that coughing hiss that always sounds like something big giving up. Now and then, headlights would glide through the rows, washing pale light across the sides of trailers, then vanish. Around 1 in the morning, I saw the man again, closer this time. He came down the row at an angle, looking not at trucks in general, but at handles, steps, cab corners, surveying. I know the difference between a man wandering and a man inventorying. He didn't linger at mine. He just let his gaze touch it and move on, the same way he touched the others. Third turn. That might have been enough for somebody younger to blow the horn then and there, make a scene, wake the lot. But age does a strange thing. It makes you conserve your alarm, because you know how easily people dismiss it if you spend it too soon. I wanted certainty. I wanted one undeniable act, one clean line, before I made myself the loud, paranoid trucker in row whatever. I called a buddy of mine who was parked that night about 40 miles east. Woke him up. He picked up on the second ring and said, "If this is a joke, I'm billing you." I told him it wasn't a joke and gave him the short version. He listened, then said, "Stay awake, keep your horn ready, and if it gets worse, don't wait for anybody at that stop to care. Call me back, and I'll start driving west if I need to." That helped more than I expected. Sometimes just hearing another driver not minimize what you're seeing puts your brain back in order. I lasted until around 2 before I tried to rest again. Not sleep exactly. Just lying down in clothes with one arm out of the blanket and boots within reach. My truck rocked now and then from the wind. Rain hissed over the windshield. The reefer unit cycled. My eyes kept closing anyway. Then I heard footsteps on the passenger side catwalk. Soft, but there. If you don't know that sound, it's hard to explain. Metal gives footsteps a different truth than pavement does. Even through a storm, your body knows when weight is on your equipment. I rolled off the bunk and up into the seat in one motion that felt faster in my head than it probably looked. Nothing at the window, nothing in the mirror but water and reflections. I stayed there breathing through my mouth, listening. No second step, no knock. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Storm noise does that. It collects into false shapes. But I didn't lie back down again. A little before 3, maybe just after, I was sitting half-turned in the driver's seat when the passenger door handle rattled. Not a tap. A real try. Hard enough that the whole door gave a short metallic shudder. At the same moment, I caught another figure in the mirror behind the trailer, standing where it blocked my view of the lane beyond. Just a dark body in rain gear, or a hooded jacket, impossible to read, placed in the one spot that told me this wasn't random. My body moved before the rest of me did. Hand to the air horn, slammed it. The blast filled the cab so hard it punched right through my chest. I held it down, kept holding it. Long, furious, ugly sound tearing out into the lot while the storm threw it around. Lights came on all over. Curtains moved. Cab doors opened. Men looked out from sleepers. One guy 3 spaces down actually stepped onto his running board and started shouting. In the mirror, the figure behind my trailer was already gone. On the passenger side, nothing. No second try at the handle. No footsteps retreating that I could hear over the horn and rain. Just absence. I kept the horn going longer than I needed to because I wanted that whole place awake. When I finally let off, the silence afterward felt wrong in my ears. Not real silence, because the storm was still going and engines were still idling, but that internal silence after too much noise, like your head is packed with cotton. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed down. By then, 2 other drivers were coming over, jackets pulled tight. One of them a younger guy in gym shorts and boots, the other an older man in a heavy work coat. Both had that irritated, alert look people get when they've been yanked out of sleep, and then immediately realize, maybe it was worth it. "What happened?" the older one asked. "Somebody tried my passenger door," I said. "Another one was behind my trailer. At least 2. Both men looked out into the rain, then back at me. The younger guy said, "You see faces?" "No, just shapes." He nodded once, serious now, said, "That's enough." We did a quick check around my truck with flashlights. Nothing obvious. No one was hiding between the drives. No cut seals. No marks I could see in that weather. But the wet metal step below the passenger door had a muddy smear on it that wasn't there earlier. Could have been from anything. Could have been exactly what I thought. We went inside together. And this is the part that still gets under my skin more than the door handle. The cashier looked annoyed, not concerned, not apologetic. annoyed, like the horn had created paperwork for him. I told him somebody tried my cab. He said, "Well, they're gone now, right?" The older driver with me snapped, "You got cameras." The cashier said they didn't cover all the parking rows. Said management handled footage requests. Said if we wanted police, we could call. Same flat tone. Same little shrug. The gray-mustached employee from earlier didn't even come over. He stayed behind the hot food area, refilling gravy. You start to realize, in places like that, how easily a system can decide you're not an event. You're just a customer having a bad night. Too much weather. Too little sleep. Jumpy imagination. Unless the danger politely stays in place long enough to be documented on their terms, it dissolves. I called the non-emergency line again and got through that time. Gave them the location, the sequence, the attempted door try. They said an officer could swing by when available. Could, not would. The storm had people stretched thin. That was enough for me. The two drivers who'd come over said they were both heading east anyway once the rain eased a little. One was stopping at another truck stop about 30 miles down. The older one looked at me and said, "No reason for you to stay here and prove a point." He was right. So we rolled out together in a loose little convoy just after 3. Wipers fighting for their lives. Lightning showing the flat land in white flashes beyond the highway. I kept scanning my mirrors the whole way, half expecting headlights to latch onto us from behind. They never did. The second truck stop wasn't nicer, just brighter in the right way. Smaller lot, better coffee. One woman at the counter who, when we told her why we were there, immediately said, "Park under the front cameras and let me know if you need anything." That's all it took. One normal human response, and my whole body finally started coming down. I slept maybe 2 hours. In the morning, I checked my passenger door handle and stepped into the daylight. There was a clear smear of mud and one partial tread on the metal plate. Again, maybe that proves something, maybe it doesn't. Trucks live in mud. But my truck had been through mostly paved lots that week, and I hadn't used the passenger side since my pre-trip. I called the original truck stop later that day after my delivery, asked for a manager, and explained everything from the start. He told me he'd look into it. Nobody ever called back. No report, no camera follow-up. No, we reviewed the footage and saw nothing. Not even that. Just silence. And that's what bothers me now, years later. Not just the men in the rain, though I think there were at least 2 and maybe more. Not just the door handle. Not just the way one figure stood behind my trailer, where it cut off my sightline, while the other tested the cab. It was practiced, and that's bad enough. What bothers me is how easy it was for the whole place to absorb it. A busy truck stop in a storm is perfect that way. Everybody assumes somebody else is watching. Everybody assumes strange behavior belongs to weather, fatigue, strangers, or background noise. A man can stand under a canopy too long. A figure can move between rows. A driver can complain, then complain again. And unless something final happens, the system keeps choosing the cheaper explanation. Probably harmless. I still sleep with the same habits. Boots ready. Keys same place. Curtain gap. Flashlight on the shelf. Maybe more than one reason to love routine after a night like that. But every time I stop somewhere crowded and somebody tells me a place is safe because there are always people around, I think about that lot outside Amarillo. All those trucks. All those lights. All those employees. All those chances for somebody to take one man seriously before he had to lay on the air horn at 3 in the morning. And I still wonder how many other drivers had pointed out the same man, or men like him, before one night the weather got loud enough that nobody heard a door handle shake. The last one is the one I keep circling back to, mostly because it almost resolved itself into something normal, and then refused to stay there. I was already halfway back to my motel when I started feeling stupid for being nervous. The SUV that had been behind me through the trees had gone on without stopping, and the road ahead was empty except for my headlights and the occasional reflector post. I remember laughing once, by myself, because I had turned a quiet northern Michigan road into a whole little thriller in my head for no reason. By morning, I honestly thought that was all it had been. Then I pulled back into the gas station and found police tape fluttering between the antique pumps. I do a lot of road trips alone, not in some rugged van life way. I just like old roads, old signs, old motels, old diners, old family businesses that somehow stayed standing after the chain places ate everything around them. I work freelance, mostly design stuff I can do from my laptop, so every once in a while, I'll take a week and pick a region with older highway routes and just drive. I bring my camera gear, a notebook, a cooler with bad grocery store sandwiches, and I stop every time I see something that still looks like itself. That's why I was up in northern Michigan that week, early fall, when the trees were just starting to shift but hadn't gone full tourist postcard yet. The roads were beautiful in that low-key way the Midwest gets. Long stretches of forest, old lake towns, stretches of faded roadside business that looked like they were hanging on by habit. I love that stuff. I especially love old gas stations because they're weirdly personal. The hand-painted signs, the old service bays, the little displays no corporate place would ever keep. Even when they're run down, you can usually tell what decade they felt best in. That station was exactly the kind of place I'd stop for even if I didn't need gas. Tiny building, white paint gone a little chalky, old globe-style pump tops out front, faded oil signs from the 1960s, still hanging near the eaves. There was a narrow gravel pull-off in front, and dense forest wrapping around the back, and both sides so tightly it made the place feel tucked into the road instead of built on it. It looked less like a business and more like something a movie set decorator would build if you told them to make a rural station from memory. I had spent most of the day taking photos farther west and was heading toward a motel in a small town, maybe 25 minutes away. Not late, but getting into that part of evening where the light goes flat under trees and everything starts looking more closed than open. My tank was down enough that stopping made sense, and honestly, I would have stopped anyway for the pictures. The owner was an older man, probably late 70s, maybe more. Thin, gray hair, buttoned work shirt, glasses low on his nose. He had that very specific way some older rural business owners talk, where they sound reserved without being unfriendly. Inside, the station was a time capsule. Postcards by the register, racks with local maps, a cooler humming loud enough to hear from the counter, jars of hardware odds and ends near a side shelf, like the place couldn't fully decide whether it was a gas station or a general store. It smelled like old wood, machine oil, and cedar cleaner. I filled up, then went in, and ended up chatting with him for a minute, because he saw my camera, and asked if I was taking pictures of the old signs. He said people did that now and then. I bought a postcard from a little wire spinner by the register, because it had an old illustration of the station on it, probably from decades ago. Bright colors faded just enough to be good. I figured I'd stick it in my notebook. The whole interaction was pleasant, almost quiet. He asked where I was headed. I told him the town name. He nodded, rang me up, and handed over the postcard. And then, right as I was leaving, he asked, in this oddly careful voice, "Did you come in on the East Road, or the service road?" It wasn't alarming in the moment, just specific. I said, "The East Road, I think. Came down past that closed bait shop a few miles back." He stared at me for maybe a second too long, then said, "All right, safe drive." That was it. I got back in the car, put the postcard on the passenger seat under my phone cable, and headed out. I remember the station dropping away in my mirror, those antique pumps looking almost theatrical in the last of the light. The East Road out of there wound through dense forest, not mountain forest, nothing dramatic, just thick stands of trees close to the road, little shoulder, very few houses, patches where the canopy made it feel darker than it should have been for the hour. I wasn't bothered. I like roads like that. I grew up taking solo drives with a camera just to clear my head. Being alone never made me nervous in the automatic way it does for some people. Usually, I notice structure first. Buildings, light, how the road bends, what belongs where. That probably sounds pretentious, but if you spend enough time photographing places, you get trained to read scenes for composition and interruption. You clock what fits, so when I noticed headlights behind me maybe 5 or 6 minutes later, I didn't immediately care. One vehicle on a rural road is just another person on a rural road. What changed was the consistency. Same distance, no attempt to pass, no drifting back, no getting closer. Just there. I checked the mirror a few times and finally got enough of a look to tell it was a black SUV, or at least very dark, with headlights bright enough that I couldn't make out the grille details. Again, none of that means anything by itself. Plenty of people drive black SUVs. Plenty of people keep a steady following distance because that's what competent drivers do. Still, I thought about the owner's question. East Road or Service Road. The more I rolled it around, the more it seemed like an oddly practical thing to ask, right at the end of a normal interaction, unless route choice mattered for some reason. I told myself maybe one road was flooded. Maybe the service road was rougher after dark. Maybe he was just making conversation the way locals do when they're trying to place where you've come from. Then the SUV stayed behind me through every turn, not tailgating, not overtaking, just present. I adjusted my speed a little, nothing dramatic. It adjusted too. That's when I felt my body start quietly preparing itself. Not fear yet, more attention. My hands moved higher on the wheel. I turned my music down until it was basically nothing. I noticed the inside of the car more, the fabric of the seatbelt against my neck, the smell of stale fries from lunch in the floorboard, the little click from a lens cap rolling near the center console every time I took a curve. I told myself there were still normal explanations. Maybe we were both headed to the same town. Maybe there were only so many roads through there. Maybe I was turning one coincidence into a story because I had spent the day alone with my own thoughts and too much coffee. Up ahead, there was a scenic overlook, just a gravel cutout with a low rail where people could stop and look through a break in the trees toward a marshy stretch below. I made a quick decision and pulled in, partly because I wanted to test the feeling, partly because if the SUV followed me into the overlook, then I would have an actual reason to take myself seriously. I turned in, gravel crunching under the tires, and stopped. The SUV kept going. No brake lights, no hesitation. Just passed me and disappeared around the bend. I sat there for a second with both hands still on the wheel and let out this breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Then I laughed, full-on laughed at myself, because of course it kept going. Of course it did. Somebody was just driving the same road I was driving. That's all. I got out for maybe a minute, mostly to reset. The air smelled like wet leaves and cold dirt. It was getting cooler fast. I could hear insects in the brush, and, farther off, one lonely engine sound fading away, where the SUV had gone. No voices, no movement. Just forest and evening. I even took one quick photo of the overlook, because the light was nice in that muted blue way right before dark. By the time I got to my motel, I had demoted the whole thing to road brain. That's what I call it when you drive too long alone and start assigning intent to random details. I checked in, hauled my bag up to the room, texted a friend a picture of the postcard and the station exterior, and made a joke about becoming one of those people who get murdered by their own hobby. Very funny, very original. Then I showered, watched about 10 minutes of cable news with the sound low, and fell asleep hard. That's the false part of it. The relief was real. I didn't spend the night staring through curtains. I didn't hear tires outside. I wasn't unsettled anymore. If anything, I was mildly embarrassed that I'd let a perfectly ordinary drive spook me. The next morning, I went back because I wanted better daylight shots. That was completely in character for me. I do this all the time. Scout a place in evening light, then come back when I can see details better. I grabbed coffee from the motel lobby, threw my camera bag in the passenger seat, and drove out after sunrise while the roads were still mostly empty. I knew something was wrong before I reached the pumps. There were too many vehicles, and none of them were regular customer cars. Sheriff's SUVs, a state police unit, and one unmarked sedan, all angled around the tiny station in a way that made the whole place feel smaller. Yellow tape ran from the porch post to one antique pump, then over toward the side lot. An officer was standing near the road, slowing traffic with one gloved hand. The station itself looked the same, which somehow made it worse. Same faded signs, same windows, same postcard spinner visible through the glass. But the place had changed categories overnight. I pulled over where directed and rolled down my window. The officer asked if I'd been there before. I said yesterday evening, just for gas. His whole expression sharpened, not panic, just attention. He asked me to park off to the side and wait. That was the first moment the previous night came back in a different shape. Another investigator, plain clothes under a windbreaker, came over with a notepad and asked me to walk him through exactly when I'd been there, what I'd bought, who I'd spoken with, whether I'd seen anyone else. While he was asking, I could see the elderly owner near the station entrance with another officer. He wasn't handcuffed. He wasn't talking much either. He looked smaller than he had the night before. He kept his eyes down. I told the investigator everything as clearly as I could. The gas, the postcard, the owner, the question about which road I'd taken, the black SUV following me, the overlook, the fact that it had passed. The investigator stopped writing for a second at that part, asked me to repeat the question exactly. East Road or Service Road, I said. He nodded once and wrote it down. Then he asked if I'd gone around to the back of the station or seen any outbuildings. I said no, just the main building and pumps. He pointed past the station toward a low structure, partly hidden by trees, and said officers had found evidence that the storage building behind the property had been used overnight for organized criminal activity. He didn't define it in detail, and I didn't ask him to. I didn't need specifics to understand the general shape of what he meant. Multiple people, coordinated use, not some random isolated thing. My skin went hot and then cold in that delayed way it does when your brain has to revise a recent memory fast. I looked toward the owner. He glanced up then, finally, and recognized me. That was the worst part of the morning, honestly. Not the police tape. Not the implication of what had been happening out back. It was that tiny moment of recognition. Because when he saw me, he didn't look surprised. He looked tired and guilty, or scared, or both. I still don't know which. The investigator asked if I would be willing to give a formal statement at the sheriff's office. I said yes. I sat in my car for a few minutes, first trying to steady myself enough to drive. My coffee had gone cold in the cup holder and smelled sour. I could hear radios crackling outside, doors opening and shutting, somebody unspooling more tape. The morning was bright, perfectly normal weather, and there was this absurd postcard still floating in my mind, the one I had bought because I thought the station looked charming. At the sheriff's office, I went over everything again. They asked about the SUV. I told them what little I knew. Dark, probably black, followed at a steady distance. Didn't stop when I pulled into the overlook. They asked whether I thought the owner had been warning me or checking on me. I said I honestly couldn't tell. At the time, I'd assumed it was small talk. In hindsight, it felt more like he was trying to figure out who else might have seen me arrive, or whether I had crossed paths with people using the back property. But even as I said that, it felt slippery. His tone when he asked hadn't been hard or probing. It had sounded almost careful. That's the word I keep coming back to. I left town that afternoon instead of staying the rest of the week as I'd planned. Nothing official told me to. I just didn't want to keep making nice little photo stops after that. The whole hobby felt altered for a while. Once you learn that a place can present itself as nostalgia, while something else is operating 10 yards behind it. Your eye changes. Every charming old station starts to feel like a stage set with a locked door somewhere off frame. For months afterward, I thought mostly about the owner. Not in a sentimental way, more like a puzzle I couldn't stop testing. Was he in on it? Was he trapped? Was the question about the roads a warning in the only form he thought he could risk? Or was it a check, making sure I had or hadn't seen the wrong vehicle come through? There was no clean answer. I followed local coverage for a bit, but there wasn't much public detail, at least not enough to settle anything. A rural property, ongoing investigation, several persons of interest, no full comment, the usual wall of careful language. I went back through the photos on my camera card more than once, zooming in on reflections in the station window like I was going to solve something from pixels and coincidence. The strangest detail didn't hit me until much later. A couple of months after the trip, I was unpacking a bag I hadn't fully emptied from the back of my closet. I found the notebook I had meant to put the postcard in. Empty. I checked the camera bag, the side pocket of my duffel, the glove compartment, the pages of a road atlas I had brought. Every dumb place flat paper can hide. Nothing. At first, I figured I had simply lost it. That made sense. I toss receipts and brochures everywhere on trips. But then I remembered texting my friend a photo of it from the motel room. I went back through the messages. There it was on the bedspread beside my room key, and the little wrapped mint from the motel front desk, meaning I had definitely brought it inside after leaving the station the first night. After that, I never saw it again. Maybe it slipped out somewhere ordinary. Maybe I tucked it into a book and forgot. Maybe it got thrown away with a stack of receipts when I cleaned the car. All of those are possible. That's the problem. Every detail in this story has a normal version sitting right beside the bad one. But I still think about the owner looking at me across the police tape, and about that missing postcard, and about how I still can't tell whether the old man at the register was protecting the people behind that station, or whether he was the only other person there who also wasn't free to leave.